Today we're going to be looking at adverbs of frequency. Today we're going to talk about this type of adverb, and we're going to talk about why do we use them and in what kind of sentences do we use them. So we'll start out by talking about that. So adverbs of frequency. We use adverbs of frequency when we use the simple present tense. You can recall from simple present tense, we tend to use this tense when we're talking about repeated actions. Adverbs of frequency are words that tell people how often an activity or action is repeated. And so when we're using it in the simple present tense to talk about routines and repeated actions, this tells us the frequency of it. So it tells us more information about that so we can get a better understanding of it. Here are some common examples of adverbs of frequency. So these are some of the most common ones that you will see. And when you see these words, now you know that they are called adverbs. And not only any adverb, because there's a lot of different types of adverbs in English. These ones are adverbs of frequency specifically. Okay, so for these adverbs of frequency, we have the words always, usually, often, sometimes, seldom, hardly ever, rarely, and never. So these are the ones that are most commonly used, but there are more. So whenever something is describing how often an action is happening, that's usually an adverb of frequency. So if you see something else like that in a sentence, but it's not on this list, it is still probably an adverb of frequency. Now, all of these different adverbs of frequency, they mean different things. So let's have a look at this chart here. Here we can see all of the adverbs of frequency that I previously listed. Always, usually, often, sometimes, occasionally, seldom, rarely, hardly ever, never. These are the general meanings of them. So always means that when you always do something, you do it 100% of the time. So for example, if you say, I always drink coffee, it means you drink coffee 100% of the time. Does that mean that you're drinking it 24 hours, 7 days a week? Not exactly, but you're saying that out of 7 days in a week, every day, all 7 days, you drink coffee at least once. So I always drink coffee. Usually is 90%. So maybe there's one day that you are not drinking coffee. Maybe you don't like to drink coffee on Sundays. Maybe you like to sleep in instead. When you wake up, it's too late for coffee. But all other 6 days you drink coffee, then that's 6 out of 7 days in a week. Usually that's like 90% of the time. 70% is often, so less than usually. Half of the time is sometimes. A little bit less than that, we can say occasionally. Seldom is not very often, just a little bit of the time. And rarely is like once on a special day, you will do something. Hardly ever is even less than that. And never is 0% of the time. So if you say, I never drink coffee, it means you drink coffee 0% of the time for 0 days in a week. So never. These are the really common adverbs of frequency and what they mean. Now, when we talk about these adverbs of frequency, 100%, 90%, 70%, 50, 30, 10, these are all guidelines. You might hear English speakers use them differently, but they're guidelines. So if you're talking about how often you do something, do you need to break out a calculator to figure out how many days you're doing it out of the year, what percentage of days? You don't need to break out a calculator and choose whatever's closest to this. As long as when you say always, you know it's all the time. But when you're saying occasionally or sometimes or seldom, often, sometimes English speakers change these up and they don't exactly mean these percentages because everybody has a different idea of what sometimes means. It's just a guide. When you're learning them and learning these adverbs of frequency, you should use the guide. But when you move somewhere or you listen to an English speaker use it in different ways, use it how they use it in that region. It's not an exact right or wrong thing. The only things that you will get exactly right or wrong is if you don't use always correctly or never. So this is very clear, 100 or 0. So we'll talk about the structure. We have done structure videos before, so this is just a review. And this is the simple present structure. We need to know the simple present structure because we use adverbs of frequency when we use the simple present tense. That's why it's important. So if you can remember some of the other videos, especially when we talked about an overview of the tenses or when we looked at simple present tense in detail, you'll remember our structure is SVO. S stands for subject, V is the main verb, and O is for object. And just to remind you that all of the verbs that we have, they stay in the base form. This is also known as the V1 form. And the only time that this is different is when a verb comes after the third person singular subject pronoun. So, for example, he, she, or it is a noun. So, the boy, the girl, the table, the dog, something like that. Then the verb is going to be changed and you're going to add an S on the end of the verb or sometimes an ES. And if you want to know those special cases, when do we add an ES and when do we just add an S? Look at the video that is simple present tense in detail and it goes over all of those rules and has some practice questions there for you as well. But we can see that over here. So I speak Spanish, I is a subject, speak is the main verb, and the object here is Spanish. And so in this case, we don't have a third person singular pronoun, so we're not going to add the S. But in this one, he drinks coffee. Now we have he is the subject, and this one is the third person singular pronoun. So on the word drink, we do add an S. So what does that mean when we apply our adverbs of frequency? When we're applying our adverb of frequency, we will put the adverb of frequency before the main verb. So now if we break this down, we can see subject, adverb of frequency, then the main verb, then the object. Okay, so we put the adverb of frequency right here because it is used to modify this verb. So it's good to put it directly in front of it. There is one case where we don't always follow the structure or rule, and that is the case of the word sometimes. So you can see down here. You can add sometimes at the front of the sentence, but you can't do that with other adverbs of frequency. So you might hear it sometimes being put at the beginning. That's correct with this word. But in other adverbs of frequency, you can't do that. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's look at all these examples over here. We'll look at the breakdown and then we'll look at the special case of sometimes. Subject, adverb of frequency, main verb, object. I never speak Spanish. In this case, the word never or adverb is talking about our main verb, speak. How often is this happening? Never. And so this word is used to tell us more information about this word. That's why it should go immediately before it. He always drinks coffee. Now in this case, again, we're following the same format. We have our subject, he, then our adverb of frequency comes right after, and then the verb is after that, and the object is after this. And the word always is telling us about how often we're doing the action of drinking coffee. And that's our verb. So that's why it should go right before. We sometimes watch movies. Same pattern here. She rarely plays the guitar. Same pattern here. Now, in the special case of sometimes, we have our form that we know is correct here. We sometimes watch movies. But here we have the special case. So we can go like this. You can say, sometimes we watch movies. That's perfectly correct too. So you can put sometimes at the beginning if you would like. However, that's not going to work all the time. For example, if you go, Never I speak Spanish. Well, because we have the special case with sometimes over here, we know this one is correct. This one is great because we have this special rule over here. But this is only for the word sometimes. So we have the word never. Never I speak Spanish. Well, that's not part of the rule. So no, this is not correct. So my tip to you is to always follow this until you become a more advanced speaker, especially if you're going to be taking a proficiency exam like IELTS or something like that, because when you get these words mixed up and the order mixed up and you say never I speak Spanish, that's wrong. It sounds very wrong. That way you're not going to sound fluent or anything like that. When you know it's correct is when you listen to native speakers and you hear how they talk or how we talk, and you can hear these changes in patterns. So sometimes you watch movies, you'll hear English speakers say this. If you hear this often, it gives you a pretty safe bet that it's okay. But if you are not in an area that has a lot of native English speakers and you can't identify these patterns very easily, always go with this. Always do subject, adverb of frequency, then made verb, then object. This is the way that you should go. So here is another form for the structure. Just a review. We have talked about this before in a previous video about the simple present tense. You can follow the structure as well, which is the subject, plus the auxiliary verb, which is be, plus the adjective, which is a describing word. So just to remind you, auxiliary verbs, like the form of be, they are also known as helping verbs. Sometimes they support the main verbs, and they provide information about the tense. And you'll rarely see the word be in a sentence because they take different forms. And the other forms it takes depends on the subject. So let's look over here. The form of be we use in the simple present tense depends on the subject. So for singular, we have is. For plural, are and I am. So you'll never see the word be in the simple present tense. You'll actually see I am happy, she is happy, they are happy, something like that. So this form of be is going to change its form. Let's look at some of these examples. I am happy. He is rude. We are excited. She is beautiful. They are nice. So we always have it right in the middle. And yes, the form changes. You'll never have the word be. You'll have it in these various forms that depend on the subject. Now, what does this mean when we're applying adverbs of frequency? We put the adverb of frequency after the auxiliary verb this time. So before, we put it before the main verb. Now we're putting it after the auxiliary verb. So this is kind of hard. Make sure you memorize this. Subject, the form of be, plus the adverb of frequency, plus the adjective. So these structures are different depending on the type of verb. If it's auxiliary verb, the adverb of frequency goes after. If it's the main verb or action verb, the adverb of frequency will come before. So let's look at some examples to talk about this new structure. So we have subject, be, adverb, adjective. Subject, I. Am is our form of be, and it's this way am because my subject is I. Now we have our adverb of frequency, usually, and then we have our adjective, which is happy. He is never rude. He is our subject, which is also pronoun. Then because it's third person and it's singular, we have is here. And then never is our adverb, rude is our adjective. Again, down here, we are rarely excited. Subject, form of be, adverb, a frequency, plus our adjective. Even if we have ed, it doesn't mean it's not an adjective. Sometimes adjective forms look like a verb and they take an ed. She is always beautiful. So she is our subject, is our auxiliary verb, always is the adverb of frequency, and beautiful is our adjective. They are often nice. Exact same thing. They is our subject. Be is in the form of are here because this is plural. Then we have the adverb of frequency, often, and then our adjective nice. So it always follows the structure like this. Again, we have the special case of sometimes. So you can add sometimes at the front of the sentence, but you can't do that with other adverbs of frequency again. So, for example, sometimes we are excited. You can say that. So if you say, I'll put it over here. We are excited. You can say sometimes. Sometimes at the beginning, let me change it. I'll give you the two forms. Say, we are sometimes excited. Sometimes we are excited. So that's fine because the word sometimes is very special for us. I don't know the reason, but it is because English just cannot have straightforward rules, which is why it's so difficult. But we can't do that with other ones. So if I can say he is never rude, however, I can't say never he is rude. I cannot say that. That is incorrect. Incorrect. That's not part of our rule of sometimes, so we can't say that. No. So just to summarize, the adverbs of frequency, they're used to talk about how often repeated actions happen, whether it's always 100% of the time, never 0%, or somewhere in the middle, sometimes, usually, often. The structures, there's two main structures we looked at today. Now, the first one has to do with the main verb. If you're working with a main verb, then we have the subject first, plus the adverb of frequency, plus the main verb, plus the object. Now, if you're working with just the form of be, then you have the subject plus the form of be, plus the adverb of frequency, plus the adjective. So this is the key thing to remember. Adverbs of frequency come before the main verb and after an auxiliary or helping verb, the form of be in this case. So keep that in mind. That summary is quite important. And again, I will say, if you're still learning English and trying to perfect it, just use these structures. Not until you get more comfortable with English and become have a higher proficiency, like an intermediate or advanced level, then you can start moving them around a little bit better based on what you know from what you hear English speakers say. But I would say, you know, this form is right. Stick to this form. You'll always be right if you stick to this form. If you change and move it around to different parts of a sentence, then it could sound weird or off. And then it will signal that your level isn't as good. So this is really important. If you're looking to do a proficiency exam in an interview like IELTS or CELPIP or something like that, then you want to stick to this form. Now we're going to do a little bit of a quiz together to see how much you can remember. Fill in the blanks with the correct adverbs of frequency. Here is the first example. I something drink green tea. So we have to think back to the beginning of the lesson. Do we remember the adverb of frequency that we used if we're talking about doing something 100% of the time? So every day in a week, for example. Do we remember? There's lots of adverbs of frequency. Which one means 100% all of the time? Let's check. Always. If you said always for 100%, then that's correct. I always drink green tea. That means every day out of 7 days in a week, for 7 days, you drink green tea. Another example sentence. I something play soccer. So what means 70%? If we think back to the beginning of our lesson, there's a word that means 70%. What is that? 70% adverb of frequency. Play soccer. How often? I often play soccer. 70% of the time is often. Not every day, not most days, but pretty often, more than half of the time. play soccer. Okay, now this one, 5%. They 5% eat spicy food. 5% is not too much. What adverb of frequency is only for 5% for using our guide? Rarely would be the one that we had in our chart at the beginning of the lesson. They rarely eat spicy foods. That's only 5% of the time they're eating spicy food. Now, let's look at these two sentences and see if we can remember our structure or order of words. A, they are usually sad, or B, they usually are sad. So there is one type of structure where we have the adverb of frequency that comes after the verb, and there's one that comes before. And it all depends on what kind of verb you're working with. So here, are we working with the auxiliary verb or are we working with the main verb? So we're working with auxiliary verb here. So we are working with the word are, which is an auxiliary verb. So let's remember our rule. Does our adverb of frequency come before or after the auxiliary verb in the sentence? A was the correct one. When we have an auxiliary verb, usually comes after the auxiliary. How did you do? So this is all about adverbs of frequency. Thank you so much for watching. Keep doing your best to study English, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.